this scholar, Luis Honus, quite a famous Buddhist scholar who studied Buddhism, who studied regions of China. He divided the periods of Buddhist history in China into 4. First is the entry. Here the entry did not mention what year. Generally, officially speaking, it is around 65 or 66 or 67 AD. That's official. Government allowed the entry of Buddhism into China. But prior to that, we know that Buddhism actually already known to the Chinese and practiced by some Chinese. But that period, we call it the entry period or the translation period, when a lot of monks did translation. That period, we consider it to have ended by the year 420 AD. Then the second period started from there, and this is the period we call it the interpretation period, when the Chinese try to interpret and understand Buddhism in the context of the Chinese. So that is ended around 618 AD during the Tang Dynasty. Then the third period, when the Buddhism actually began to take root and established itself, that's the period of establishment, that ended around 960 AD. That's approximately 1,000 years for Buddhism to enter China and then prosper. But the last 1,000 years, from 960 AD onward, Buddhism was on the sliding down, and that continued even until today. And because of that, during the at the end of the 1800s, there were efforts to revive Buddhism in China, and that effort was coined by the word we use the word Humanistic Buddhism to label the revival movement. So now, to begin with, we want to talk about the first period, that of entry and translation period. But before that, we need to go a little bit backward to India, where the Buddha first preached. You know, the Buddha was born 643 and then passed away 532 BC. And when the Buddha preached, it was oral. He preached and people listened. In the ancient times, people did not know how to write. They couldn't write. There were no papers, things like that. And the Buddha preached verbally, and his followers listened verbally. But the ancient people have a way of learning, and that is by memorizing. And the way of memorizing, later on I will explain during the time of why chanting came about. Okay, the way of memorizing is like this. Usually a group of monks, after listening, they would chant whatever that they have heard. So the ancient people actually developed a skill to listen and memorize. Not like us. We can't remember a lot of things because we have computer. We have writings to help us to remember. So we don't bother to use our brain to remember. But Asian people, they are quite good in using their brains to remember. So a group of people would chant. Let's say 20 people would chant one particular sermon. Another group would chant another sermon. And when they gathered, they would chant together and share. And that's how the teachings were preserved and carried out. Sorry, I forgot the video. Okay. So when the Buddha passed away, 3 months after he passed away, the disciples gathered together and had the first Buddhist council. We call it the first Buddhist council. where they gathered together and recited. We call it Sangiti. They recited whatever that they have heard from the Buddha, and gathered together and distributed the duties among themselves. Some of you would chant the Vinaya, some of you would chant this particular sutta, some of you would chant that particular sutta. And that's how they preserve the Buddha's teachings verbally by oral traditions. Now, historians generally agreed that this oral tradition is much more reliable than the written traditions, because written traditions is usually done by one person. And if you like it, you just change it. Nobody will be able to interfere with your changes. Whereas in the oral traditions, you can't change it, because let's say one person wanted to change one particular word, but the other person won't agree. They would chant the other way around. So it's very difficult to modify the oral traditions. And for that matter, that's why when you read the Buddhist suttas, you will notice that there are quite a lot of repetitions. And for us, sometimes we can't understand why all these repetitions. If you are an English teacher, you would fail the subject, fail the person who wrote the article, too much repetitions. But that was the way, because it was the oral traditions. So during the first council, they were compiled, the Sutta and the Vinayas. The Sutta, the teachings of the Buddha, and the Vinaya, the moral code of conducts. Then this went on. Then another 100 years later, there were some disputes over the Vinayas, the code of conducts. Now, those disputes, in our modern day context, we find it hard to understand. We cannot understand, but it was a big matter at that time. For example, whether the monks can store salt in the horn of a cow, whether a monk traveling from one village to another could have another meal. Here you have one meal, but when you go to that, when you reach another village, you have another meal. And then whether they could wear leather shoes, things like that. They were all minor things, but it became a big issue. So they started a second council. But until that point, there were no dispute over the teachings. Then came the Ashoka. Okay, this is where the photograph I'm showing you now. By the time of Emperor Ashoka, many Brahmins have become monks, and they brought along some Brahmin ideas into Buddhism, into the community of monks. And they will also dispute over the teachings now, and some dispute over the Vinayas. So Ashoka, being the main sponsor of Buddhism at that time, he called for the Third Buddhist Council. Okay, in the Third Buddhist Council, again, the Sutta were recited, the Vinaya was recited, and then they also compiled the Abhidhamma. The Abhidhamma is not new, it's just a synthesis from the Sutta and the Vinaya. So that's why we call it the three baskets, or the three Pitaka. Okay, so the three Pitaka was made available only after the Third Buddhist Council. And also at this council, they compiled a small booklet. It's not a booklet because it's still verbally, a small thesis to refute all the heretical teachings that had crept into Buddhism. And after the Third Council, King Ashoka sent his missionaries to every part of the world. So he sent here to Sri Lanka, okay, and to Central Asia. This area here, Taklin Basin, today is part of China. So he sent to to the Central Asia, this Bactria, and to Asia Minor or Middle East. Alexandria, because Alexander came earlier than Alexander came to India. He was in India earlier than Ashoka, and they already built a city called Alexandria in Egypt. It's one of the oldest cities surviving until today. So from here, you notice that they actually spread. The missionaries actually came all the way here. And for this reason, when people ask me, is it true that Jesus Christ came to India and learned Buddhism, things like that? This is a very interesting story. My answer is there is no evidence yet that the Jesus Christ came to India to learn the Dhamma. But if you read the book, Two Masters, One Message by a Canadian scholar, you will notice that actually that scholar tried to tell us that there are actually a lot of things that are taught by Jesus Christ that you could find in the Dhammapada. Okay, but to me, if he had come to India and learned something, or even if he were just to be in Middle East here, he could have learned something about Buddhism and Hinduism, because this was already a one cultural block from here, Turkey, Athens, present day Israel, Jordan area, right until Kashmir, Afghanistan area. This was already one, we call it the Greek cultural block. Okay. Now, on the right hand side, he sent to the place here. This map here put here as Burma, but when Ashoka sent his missionaries here, this place was not labeled as Burma. It was labeled as Suvarna Bhumi. If you go to Bangkok, the airport is called Suvarna Bhumi Airport, but the Thai people always follow the last word, so it's called Suvarna Bhumi. Okay, Suvarna Bhumi Airport. So where is Suvarna Bhumi? Su means good. You know very well in Buddhism, Su means good. Du or du means not so good, bad. So Su means good. Varna means in my Malay word here means color. So Suvarna means good color. Suvarna actually means gold. Okay, and Bhumi means earth. So it's a land of earth, or what called land of gold, land of gold. So when Ashoka sent his mission to Suvarna Bhumi, today scholars try to understand where is Suvarna Bhumi. So if you are a Burmese, you claim Suvarna Bhumi is in Burma. If you are Thai, then you claim Suvarna Bhumi is in Thailand. If you are Cambodian, you say Suvarna Bhumi is in Cambodia. And since I'm in Malaya, I also claim it is in Malaya. Well, actually, all the answers are correct. All the answers are correct because Suvarna Bhumi actually refers to this vast area here, from Burma to Thailand to Cambodia, the whole of Southeast Asia, except Indonesia side. That area is not called Suvarna Bhumi. It is called Suvarna Dipa. Dipa means referring to island. Okay, so it's an island of gold. Okay, so this is just to share with you how Buddhism spread during the time of Ashoka, and it's very important to note this point because without Ashoka, probably today Buddhism would not be a world religion. But on the other hand, what we are interested here today is he actually sent missionaries to what is today part of China. And Ashoka did that when this was done, the third council, it was in the year 250 BC, 250 BC, which was at least 250 years earlier than the official record of how Buddhism entered into China. But there is a great possibility that China being in a state of of war, that there's a possibility that Buddhism did not reach today we call it the China proper. It would have reached the western part of China. And the Chinese would have known something about Buddhism, but not officially. So if you look at the next slide, we know Ashoka, his influence actually reached Central Asia. And we know Xing Huangdi actually ruled in China from 246 to 210 BC. Okay. So you notice Ashoka and Xing Huangdi, they are more or less same period. Xing Huangdi is said to be the first emperor to unite China into one empire. Okay. Now it is said that 18 Indian samanas came to Xianyang, the capital of Xing Huangdi, in around 217 BC. The date is not very exact. Okay, nobody knows for sure, but around 217 BC to preach, but they were imprisoned by Xing Huangdi. Whereas Qin Shi Huang, or another name Xing Huangdi, the Chinese have many names, you know. I know for the Westerners, it's very difficult to remember the Chinese names. But to make life even harder for you, we not only have one names. Ancient Chinese actually used to have three names. One is called Ming, the other one is called Zi, and the other one is called Hao. So actually, you have three names. So sometimes if you are not careful, you thought there are three persons, or maybe there are two persons, but actually it could be the same person. And also, during the time of the Han Dynasty, this man by the name of Chang Jian actually already went to Middle Asia up to today's Tajikistan as an ambassador. So there were already some form of cultural exchange. So it's not surprising if people already knew about Buddhism. So historians generally can accept the fact that Buddhism might be known to the Chinese, but maybe not widespread, because not official. Then came official date is first entry of Buddhism into China, official date 61 or 62 AD. During the late Han Dynasty, Emperor Han Mingdi. Okay? Han Mingdi actually had a dream. He had a dream. He dreamed that a golden statue, a golden man, actually appeared in his dream. So the next morning, he inquired from his officers, who is this golden man? Then his officers told him, there's a great man born in India, known as the Buddha. I think you have dreamt about this man. So Mingdi sent 18 officers to India to try and bring back this so-called golden man. Now, from this story, we know they must have known something about Buddhism. Otherwise, his officers won't be telling him about the holy man in India. So they must have known something about Buddhism. And therefore, Emperor Mingdi sent his envoys to India, and they fetched back two famous monks. But we believe it's more than two monks, because usually the monks may be accompanied by other junior monks, but junior monks we do not mention them. But there were two famous monks, Kassapa Matanga and Dharma Raksa. Okay? And these two persons were said to be the earliest Buddhist missionary monks that had reached China. And Emperor Mingdi, after inviting them into China, established a temple called the White Horse Temple, Bai Ma Si. This is where he housed Kassapa Matanga and Dhammaraksa, and they were told to do the translations. Okay, do the translation. So the earliest period here is entry and translations. You know, India by that time, most of the literatures or words were used Sanskrit, but the Chinese, they were not familiar with the Sanskrit. So we had to depend on some of these scholar monks to translate them into Chinese. So this is the white horse temple. Outside the temple, you put a white horse to indicate that. So if you visit Luoyang in China, don't miss this historical temple of about 2,000 years. Okay? And it is said that at that time, monasteries were built. Han Mingdi allowed monasteries were built, and monks were allowed to practice their monkhood. And it was said that the Buddhist population at that time was around 90%. Okay? Now, also at this time, slightly later than Matanga and Dhammaraksa, we have other famous monks such as Buddha Chinga, Kumarajiva, and Pasien. All three of them, we must try to remember their names. Plus, just now Matanga and Kasapa, Matanga, Kasapa, and Dhammaraksa. These are all early monks who did great jobs to bring Buddhism into China. So Buddha Chinga, because there are too many of them, if I introduce every one of them, eventually you will get confused. So I will jump Buddha Chinga. But all that I can say is he was quite influential in the sense that he trained quite a lot of local monks, including one by the name of Tao An. And this Tao An actually assisted Kumarajiva later to translate the Buddhist suttas. So, but there is one name that we cannot miss, and that is Kumarajiva. Okay, Kumarajiva, Xiu Lo Mo Zi. If you read today's suttas, a lot of suttas begin with the word that Yao Qing Xiu Lo Mo Zi Feng Zhao Yi, means the Kumarajiva of the Yao Qing court translated this on the order of the king. So that's why when you read the Heart Sutta, you will come out Yao Qing Xiu Lo Mo Zi Feng Zhao Yi. So a lot of early suttas were translated by this man Kumarajiva. Kumarajiva, we have a very interesting stories about Kumarajiva. He was his mother was a princess of Kucha. If you look at the map, Kucha, probably somewhere in Xinjiang today. In Chinese, it's called Qiuci. Then the mother was the princess of Kucha. The father, his father, by the name of Kumara, was a son of a minister in northern in India. So, on one of his visits, Kumara, father of Kumarajiva, met the princess of Kucha, and later they got married. But the princess of Kucha was already a Buddhist. Now, here is another interesting point, because there's evidence that the Kucha princess was already a Buddhist. So the princess delivered Kumarajiva. Okay? But after delivering Kumarajiva, about 6 years after delivering Kumarajiva, when Kumarajiva was only 6 years old, Kumarajiva's mother got permission from her husband to become a nun. So she became a nun and brought Kumarajiva into the temple. So Kumarajiva was brought up in the temple as a young boy, and he was a very talented man. He learned many things, memorized many things, and he became so very well known. Later part, he became a monk. Then he was actually captured by rivaling forces fighting in in Kucha area in Central Asia. He was captured and actually brought to China. So brought to China, and that was where he did all the translation. So now you look at most of the Chinese Mahayana suttas that we know today, they were first translated by Kumarajiva. First, Diamond Sutta. Okay. Then you have the Amitabha Sutta. Then you have the Lotus Sutta. Then you have the Vimalakirti Nidesa Sutta. This is a sutta about the layman Vimalakirti. Then you have the, we call it the Zhonglun or the Mula Majjhima Karika. Okay. Mula means the root, Mula. Majjhima, middle. Okay. Karika, okay, is the verses. Okay. So Mula Majjhima Karika. He translated this Zhonglun. That became the foundation for Mahayana Buddhism. And of course, the most famous one that he has translated is the Heart Sutra. Prajna Paramita Sutta, Heart Sutra. The famous verse of 色不异空，空不异色，色即是空，空即是色。Meaning form is void, void is form. Okay. You cannot understand this, right? A lot of people cannot understand it. You know, this would be another lecture to try to understand what he was trying to say. So, but here just to show you that Kumarajiva actually translated one of the pioneers. Now, interesting to note that during this period, not also Buddhists travel to India to learn Buddhism. So there was this monk by the name of, he traveled all the way to India to learn the Buddhism, to learn the Dhamma, and then bring back to China. Faxian started from this place here is labeled as Chang'an. You know where is Chang'an now? This place is called Xi'an. Have you done your exercise, by the way? Have you labeled your place? You know, this place called Xi'an.
Yes, we have.
It's an ancient capital of China. Okay, huh? Have you got it in your map? Xi'an. Xi'an is the ancient capital. Xi'an not too far away. Our journey. The end of 300 and the end of 300. Travel all the way here, then cross this pass to northern India and come in. No, so far we notice nobody crossed this area, Tibet, which is on very high ground. Instead of crossing the high ground, barren high ground, they actually prefer to cross the desert, then cross the pass, came to northern India, and then come down and come to this Ganges Valley area where the Buddha preached. And then Faxian, after his journey, he traveled by sea to Sri Lanka. Okay. From Sri Lanka, he was said that he actually ended by sea in Java. Now this route shows that he came this way on the western side of this Sumatra island. Some maps show that the route actually came in between the Straits of Malacca. We are not sure which route it took because it all depends on the wind. At that time, there were no engine-powered ships. But I was told most probably is this coming through the Straits of Malacca, because usually this area is the Indian Ocean is actually very turbulent area, and they will wait for a time when the wind blow this way, and then they will come this way and ended up here. But anyway, because he stayed in Java, so Java at the bottom, so people believe that he could have Java. He could have come this way. Then from there, he traveled back to China. And by the way, actually here is already China. Here is already China. You could have just landed in any part of China, but the wind would blow him all the way here. By the way, he did not charter a ship. These were all mostly merchant ships at that time. We call it the maritime Silk Road. The ships were mostly carrying food from China to India and in the Arabian area or to Europe. So you just have to take a hike, each hike on the ship to go back to your country. Ancient sea travelers, they wouldn't mind to carry a monk in the ship, but that monk would provide the necessary magical blessings. So the monks have to probably take a hike. Probably don't have to pay any money. I will just be with you, provide you the so-called blessing and protection services. You take me along that. Okay? Now, the most interesting part about Pa Tian is that actually he wrote this book called a record of Buddhist kingdoms. That is where he recorded all the Buddhist kingdoms in Central Asia, where we come to have an understanding of Buddhism in Central Asia. Okay, that was the early period. Now we enter the second period. So the early period, mostly monks traveling here and there. Then the second period now, we say 420 to 618. Why do we choose to use the word interpretation period is because during this period, the Chinese not only try to understand the original Buddhist text, but try to understand it with the interpretation from the Chinese perspective, where they try to read it in the context of China, try to indigenize the teachings which was from India into China. So we call it the interpretation period. During this interpretation period, 420 to 618, there are a few important men. Okay, one of them is Bodhidharma, and I think most of you might have heard about Bodhidharma. Okay, about 483 to 540, he came to India, and another one is Paramatta, another Indian, 499 to 569. They were the one who came and stayed in China. This time not so much to do translation, but to preach. Now this not so handsome man is called Bodhidharma. Although he passed away already, 589 AD, he already passed away. Today he's still making good money, especially for the Japanese. Because the Japanese make toys from his image. Make toys. You go to a lot of Japanese temples, or you go to Japan, just along any of tourist site, you probably would come across this door here. This is actually the face of Bodhidharma, and it may be sold for, let's say, 1,000 yen or 2,000 yen, something like that. So Bodhidharma is still making some financial contribution, earning money for us. Bodhidharma, eventually, we call him the founder of Zen Buddhism in China. That is when he taught meditation in China. That's why we call it Damo Zhu Si. Bodhidharma is the Grand Master who brought Zen practices into China. Now, after the second period, we have the third period. The third period from 618 to 916 is the establishment period. Establishment period during the Sui and the Tang dynasty. You look at the period, 581 to 618 is the Sui dynasty. The third period 618 to 907 during the Tang dynasty. That's why normally we would say Buddhism became very established and reached its peak during the Tang dynasty. That was mainly because of political stability and economic prosperity, and many temples were built, many caves were dug, they made a lot of great grottos, and there was a lot of flourishing of Buddhism in China at that time. And also at that time, well-known monks like Xuanzang, and then Yi Ji, they also traveled all the way to India to bring back more suttas, to have more cultural exchange with the Indians. So this establishment period, this period of flourishing of Buddhism in China, was actually mainly supported by the political and economic stability. When travelers or businessmen, when they are successful in business, they would think that the Buddha or the Bodhisattva might have blessed me quite a lot. And out of gratitude, I would do something to repay. So normally they would have made vows. They would have made vows. Then when their vows were realized, then they would build temples, or they would make some Buddha images, or especially in the cave, they would dig up the cave and do make some images, things like that. So this was during this period that many temples were built, and grottos was made. Now, one of the most famous one, you should not miss, is the Mo Gao cave in Dunhuang. Actually, in Dunhuang, there were many caves, not only this one. There are grottos, big series of caves, grottos. This grottos was actually very early. People did not know it. It became only a small part by the time of 1900. It became a mostly covered. These are all modern rebuilt, you know. And there was only a Taoist priest who managed this place, and he looked at this place as if that is his personal properties. And for that matter, actually, a lot of people did not know that there's a great treasure inside here. But later it was discovered, and but unfortunately, this Taoist priest, not knowing the value of these things, he actually sold a lot of the paintings inside the cave, a lot of scriptures, a lot of things. He sold to collectors all over the world. So a lot of things were missing from here. And it was also said, I'm not so sure how far it's true, maybe it's just a joke. During winter, when it's too cold, he would take some of the scriptures and burn them, get fire, to keep warm with it, not knowing the value of these things. I'm not so sure. My scholar friends say that. Okay, how big is this Dunhuang cave? 1.68 kilometer. From here to here, the height is about 50 meter. 50 meter, and usually it's 5 stories, 3, 4, 5. But inside is about 5 stories. And stretched for 1.68 kilometer. And they dug caves all along here. So they were, for example, this is one of the caves. They were altogether 755 caves. And the paintings, mostly a lot of paintings. You know, they did a lot of paintings on the wall. The paintings 45,000 meters square. And the sculptures, these are sculptures, 2,450. And the manuscripts, 50,000 were discovered also by chance when that Taoist priest, one day, using the smoke of cigarette, he noticed that the smoke of cigarette could travel somewhere and come out. So he dug the place and went inside and he found those manuscripts. That's where he started selling. And this became very valuable because it is not only a Buddhist cave, it is a cultural cave because practically everything is painted there. This picture here is not about Buddhism, it's about war. It's about war, people returning from war. So today, Tumpang becomes the subject matter. Now there's a branch of study called the Tumpang body of knowledge. Okay? But from this one, you know how great Buddhism had flourished by then. How much support? Like I said, mostly because this businessmen traveling to the West, they would make a vow. And if I'm successful, I'll come back, I will dig one cave here, I will do something. So they probably travel by the Silk Road to Central Asia, all the way to Europe, make some money, and when they come back, they dig one hole here. So everybody did that. So a big, gigantic cultural masterpiece. Okay, now, but I just show you one example to Bangpa. Actually, there were many. This is another place. I also can't remember where it is now. Then we have Luoyang. I'm sorry, we have Longgang Siku, Longgang, and then Longmen Siku. Sorry, Yinggang and Longmen, Yinggang and Longmen. These two caves, I visited one of them, but I can't remember which cave. There are so many caves that when you visited too many, eventually you can't remember which one you have gone to. And actually, I don't have the photo here. Interestingly, you look at some of the caves, if I'm not mistaken, is the woman's school. You look at the Buddha image. You know how the Buddha image looks like? People say it actually looks like Wu Chetian, the Empress Wu, who served the power from at the end of the Tang Dynasty, Wu Chetian. Because artists know how to please their paymaster, you know, people who pay you to make. So when they make the Buddha image, since the ruler then was the queen, the queen of Wu Chetian, so they make the Buddha image look like her. Okay. So in fact, that tendency had always been there. People always try to please the paymaster. And the artists are very good in this. Okay, next. During this period also, one great master by the name of Xianzhang traveled all the way from China to India. Now, Xianzhang is more well known than Fa Xian, despite the fact that Fa Xian actually left for India much earlier than him. And mind you, Fa Xian actually went to India when he was already 62 years old. And by the time he came back, he was already close to 70. And he did his job and wrote the book, Record of Buddhist Kingdom, and passed away at the age of 85. So for those of you who are just 60 years old or probably around 50 something, 60, it's not too late. It's not too late for you to do something great like Fa Xian, to walk all the way from China to India. But I don't expect you to walk all the way to India or China, but probably you can do something great. But people know Xianzhang better because his contribution was much better, much greater. Fa Xian again started the same place, Chang'an. In fact, Fa Xian was inspired by the story of Xuanzang was inspired by the story of Parthian who traveled to India. So he wanted to travel this way also. This is his picture. His picture. You know, he carried all the Buddhist scripture at the back. Ladies and gentlemen, Buddhist scriptures in the ancient times were very heavy. Not like now. Now we use very thin paper. Those days, papers were very thick. They were made of wood barks or probably bamboos, smashed. So they were very heavy. But he carried the books this way. And on top, this one is an umbrella. And you guess what is this? What is this hanging down here? I'm talking alone. Actually, I want to hear some response.
I don't know what it is.
What? You don't know what it is? This is a pilot lamp, you know. Hang a lamp here. This is a torchlight. This is a modern torchlight. He traveled at night also. Okay, at night he traveled. He need a lamp, so he put an oil lamp here. Nowadays you have torchlight, you have no problem.
But is it battery operated?
They don't have a battery. No battery at that time.
Where did they get the power from?
He just keeps food in there to keep them walking.
That's the problem with too much of modern technology with us. We can't imagine how people have light in those days. It's just an oil lamp.
Oil.
Okay,
so
no battery.
I've seen the movie Swan Song. It's on YouTube, and they have it depicted as more like bells and chimes. So I always thought it was like a point of focus to keep going forward.
Cannot hear.
Yeah. That is also another way of people saying that there's some kind of bell to sound away and things like that. But there are two different versions. But generally, I think most acceptable one is that it is like a light, you know, it's an oil lamp for him.
No,
so anyway, we do not know for sure. And of course, those days the monk would carry a duster to dust away the flies, especially plenty of flies along the way. Okay?
Oh, insects.
It's one of those sticky fly things. Yeah, catch all the flies.
Okay, fly. Oh, it's a fly catcher. Okay. So he actually, during that time, because of wars in this area, the emperor actually disallowed people to travel this way. So actually, Xuanzang sneaked out of this place, sneaked out of Chang'an, and then he traveled all the way to Lanzhou, and then go up until the place Hami, and then Tufan, things like that. Actually, I have traveled along this way until here. Okay, then travel all the way to northern part of above India, and then again through this path, he came down. Then he traveled all the way. I think it took him about 6 years. As he stays sometimes he stays in some of this kingdom here. Gradually, he traveled all the way, and he visited all the holy places: Lumbini, Buddha Gaya, Lumbini, Buddha Gaya, then Deer Park at Visitana, and also Kushinara. But the most important thing, actually, he around nearby Buddha Gaya, Nalanda, where he actually studied there. Actually, before he came here, he already studied Sanskrit in Chang'an. So he came here as a student, but he eventually ended up as a lecturer. And he had debates with Brahmins, represented the Buddhists with a debate with the Brahmins. So he became very famous in India. Became a well-known Buddhist scholar, versed in Buddhism, to debate. Then later he traveled in other parts of India before eventually returned back to China. This time via another route. Now the most important thing is you notice that all these great masters to accomplish this big task, They must have very strong willpower. They must be proficient in the languages, in Chinese and Sanskrit. They must be proficient in the Dhamma. So you must have all these qualities, you need all these great qualities to be able to accomplish this big trust. So from here, we went back. And he compiled the Buddhist text when he went back to China. Well, when he came up, he actually sneaked up. But by the time when he came back, he actually was welcomed like a great hero returning home. The king sent great, a big mass of people to welcome him back home. Okay, one of his book, 大唐习义记, that's why we say his contribution is greater, because he wrote this book, 大唐习义记, or a record of the Western territories of the Tang, a record of the Western territories of the Tang, in which he described all these kingdoms here, what are the things that they do, what their way of life and things like that. Then, for example, he did mention that in one of the cities here, people here worship rats. People worship rats. There are a lot of people find it hard to believe. Is it really true? But only very recently, probably about a decade ago, 10 years ago, Chinese archaeologists actually discovered rat temples in these areas, confirmed that what Shen Zhang wrote was actually true. Okay? So that is Shen Zhang. Then, many years later, I Ching came. I Ching, slightly later than Xuan Zhang. Now, this is interesting because Xuan Zhang now traveled by sea. He did not go by land now. Sea journey had become more popular by then. So the maritime Silk Road was more well established. So he traveled by sea again to Java and came back here. This is where I stay. Okay? I'm staying in Kuala Lumpur here. 300 kilometers away here, there is a ancient Buddhist site called Bujang Valley. This place, I Ching actually stopped here for 4 months to translate the Buddhist scriptures, to continue with his translation work. And according to his description, he also wrote a book, I remember the title of the book, in which he said that travelers actually came this way, they would land on this side of the land, pull their boat across the land, and then come down again, and then journey to the India. So you imagine, how could you pull a boat across the land? Do you know how people pull a boat across the land? Why didn't they come this way and go up? Because there were a lot of pirates here. So businessmen, in order to avoid the pirates, they took the boat from here across we call it the isthmus. Now, if you imagine the boats are something gigantic and big, then you could not imagine how people are so silly as to pull a boat across the land and then slide down again on the other side. Actually, it's just a log. The so-called boat is just a big piece of log, wood, in the middle dug up, where you can put all your goods inside. So it's just just a log of timber. Just a log of timber with a sandhill tucked up. That's called a boat. And then you just pull it by elephant. The elephant will pull it up first along the river, and at the end of the river, you pull it across. Then to the other side of the river, you dump it onto the river and you come across. So I Ching has an association with Malaya in the sense that he actually stayed in Malaya for 4 months to do some work. Then he traveled all the way again. He traveled to all these places. So all this is to share to you that actually there were a lot of great cultural exchange and intercultural mingling among the Chinese and the Indians. Now, before going further, I would like to stress one more point. A lot of us, when we study history, we were told of a few names of Fa Tian, Yi Qing, Xian Zhang, then we thought, oh, these are the few people. But actually, it is not. Today's record shows people who traveled all the way to Nalanda to study actually came from places like Japan, Korea, China, even Malaya, okay, to study there. So Nalanda Monastery or Nalanda University was a world Buddhist center at that time. So by the way, this area in Malaya, Sriwijaya, was also, this area here, Sumatra and Java was also a great Buddhist center where monks would stop here before journey to India. So this was until the period of interpretation of Buddhism began to take root from the 420 to 618. So this is a second period. So now we will pause.
Are we taking a break?
Yeah, I was curious too.
That was
15
that was my
minutes.
question.
Yeah. So are we taking a break,
I
Chuhong?
think you already did.
Well, maybe
15
he got
minutes.
kicked out.
Out.
No, he's not out.
Yeah, we're taking a break.
No, I mean
All right.
I'm
mentally.
glad
just
I'm not
like,
the only
whoop.
Okay,
one.
we shall take a break now.
Uncertain.
All right,
Yeah,
15-minute
time.
break.
Okay.
Okay.
So 8:18.
Are we ready?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go.
Ready to go? Why I can't see my own video? Do you see me?
Yeah, we see you.
That's strange. I can't see myself. Anyway, okay, we will proceed. Just now we covered how Buddhism entered into China, went through a period of entry and translation, and the second period of interpretation, and the third period of establishment. Now we proceed further to see how it eventually declined in the later part. The third part, we call it the third period. Sorry, this third part is the establishment. Sorry, I haven't covered the third part, the establishment part. Just now we went through the first period. First one is the entry and translation. Then the second period of interpretation, teaching. And then the third period now is the establishment period. This is the period when the new schools developed in China. Although some of these new schools actually started development even earlier than this period, but they actually became very well established during this third period of 618 to 960, the ending period of the Tang Dynasty. During this period, Bodhidharma's chant began to take root. You know, chant master, the Bodhidharma, when he came to China, he actually came by the sea route and ended up in Canton. Today's Guangdong. From there, he proceeded to other parts of China and he preached. And from generations to generation, eventually established the Zen school. Some of you might be familiar with Zen master Huinan, said to be the sixth patriarch after Bodhidharma. Okay, so the Zen school was established during this third period, and then we also have another school of thought called the Pure Land sect that was established by Hui Yan. Okay. Then the Japanese version is different, so not to confuse you, I cancel it. This I'm following the Chinese record. Then the Vinaya school was established by Tao Xuan around the 7th century AD. So you notice that during this period, Buddhism became sectarian in China in the sense that everybody, great masters, began to establish its own emphasis on certain things. For example, Zen school emphasized on meditation. But today, if you look at the Zen practice of meditation with the Theravada practice of meditation, they may not be exactly the same. Especially the Zen school, in their meditational practice, could be quite different from what we see in the Theravada school. That is because they also absorb certain Taoist element of Taoist elements into the Zen practice. Then the Pure Land school was established, where it is believed that if you recite the name Amitabha, you will be reborn in the Pure Land of the Amitabha. Now, it is a very simple teaching in the sense that you need not have to know a lot about the Dhamma. You need not have to know about a lot about Vinaya. But all that you need to do is to keep on, remember and chant the name of Amitabha. Well, some people tend to say that this is oversimplification of Buddhism. But if you understand the background, then probably you'll be more sympathetic to this school. You must understand that China at that time, while culturally very prosperous, the so-called cultural prosperity is only among the elite class. Very few people, very few enlightened people. 95% of the population were still illiterate. Illiterate not only because they could not read, but actually their knowledge were also very limited. I want to clarify one point here. You can be illiterate, meaning to say you don't know how to read and write, but you can be very knowledgeable, especially in the ancient times. Because in the ancient times, you did not have to learn how to read and write to be knowledgeable. All you need to do is to acquaint yourself with certain teachers, follow him, and listen to him. That's why the word listen, right? Listen to the masters. That's why the great Zen sixth patriarch Huinan said, I do not know how to read, I do not know how to write. And in fact, when he wrote the Puti Usu, he actually asked people to write. Not he himself didn't write, asked people to write. But he was very knowledgeable. That was because in the ancient days, knowledge came from listening, not from writing. Not from writing or reading, from listening. So Huinan was very knowledgeable, very wise, because he learned through listening, but not writing. So when the vast majority of the population could not read and write, and also not having the opportunity to learn. So you can imagine vast majority of the Chinese people were actually, we would say, not well prepared to accept the very profound teachings of Buddhism. How are you going to talk about, Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Noble Path, meditation, training of the mind? We spend a lot of time talking about the mind. So Wei Yan's approach, Pure Land, of chanting the Amitabha, actually is a very simple approach, but very useful approach, because that will become more receptive to the vast population which were deprived of the learning process. Okay, then the other one is the Vinaya school, Tao Xie, where he preached the importance of following the Vinaya or the precepts. So there were many schools that were established, but also by the end of the third period, by the end, the end of the establishment period, all the schools actually, there were at least 8 major schools in China at that time. But by the time of the end of the third period, probably the only 2 schools that are left and even survive until today is the Chan school and the Pure Land sect. Many other schools, say for example Vinaya school, not popular now or almost non-existent now. Then you have the Tian Tai, Zhonghua, and so many others. But those are very much more scholarly and therefore not really that popular. So what is most popular today is the one that people could do something about it. Or to just chant the word of Amitabha. And in fact, meditation has got object. So you take your breath as your object meditation. But in Pure Land, you take the words Amitabha as the object. You take the sound as the object. So in a way, Pure Land is also a form of meditation, or at least we say it is a form of para meditation. Prepare yourself for meditation. Okay, so that was when during the establishment period, where all the major schools of thoughts were established at that time. Now, after all the major schools were established, then we come to the 4th period, or the decline period. The 4th period, or during the Song dynasty, begin with the Song dynasty, but it was also during this period that the wood printing of the Mahayana Sutta was compiled, was done. Today, we can get our literature very easily available. We can read books. Books are printed in abundance. If you want 1,000 or 10,000 copies, you just send to the printing press. Within the next few days, you get 10,000 copies. In the ancient days, it was not like that. In the ancient days, before the wood printing, actually, most people still rely on listening to learn. And for those people who read, actually reading was something that was like luxury, because you can only produce 1 copy at one time. Even though writing was available, let's say you want to produce a Heart Sutra, even though it's just 265 words, you have to write 265 words and produce 1 copy. The next person who wants to read, again, you have to write 265 words. If you want 10 copies, you have to write 2,650 words, like that. There was no printing. Even though printing was paper was discovered in China, but that paper cannot be used for printing. Paper was discovered in China way back in the 1st century AD. Meaning to say, mass production of printed copy was not available, all by writing. So you can imagine, actually most monks don't have opportunity to read. They only can learn from their master by living with the master, associating with the masters, and learning from the masters. But actually, the one good thing is that wood printing became available around the period when actually Buddhism was facing decline. So wood printing actually made available more reading materials. But wood printing, compared with our printing today, is still very primitive. Wood printing means you have to use a piece of wood. I don't know, today if you go to Korea, you can still see this wood printing materials. And if you go to Nanking, you still can see these wood printing materials preserved. You need let's say you take a piece of wood, 2 feet by 1 foot. You engrave all the words on the wood. So probably on that piece of wood, you will be able to engrave, say, 100 words. Mind you, that's why in the ancient Chinese sutta, you find that the words are very big because the words are actually engraved. You can't use font 12 or font 14 or font 16. You probably have to use font 48 now because it's all engraved on the piece of wood. And for each piece of wood, like a stamp that you use, you put ink and then you stamp. So if you need 100 copies, you got to stamp 100 times. So wood printing has fastened the process of producing the sutta, but it's still very slow compared with what we have today. But anyway, during that period, wood printing was already introduced. So it was a big affair in the human history where people were able to print copies of literatures. Much later, of course, it was the European Gutenberg printing that even make it even faster. But the precursor to this printing was actually in China during the Song Dynasty. Then there is a problem that during the Song Dynasty, there were a lot of Confucianists who actually became interested in Buddhism. They learned Buddhism, but not with the objective of promoting Buddhism, but with the objective of making use of Buddhism to promote Confucianism. That's why I say Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism in China, actually they compete with each other. And in the process of competing, they actually try to borrow from each other, try to learn from each other. Okay, and in this case, during the Song Dynasty, people like Zhu Xi, Chen, they refer to two brothers. Actually, they are from Wuhan, Chen from Wuhan. They actually learned Buddhism, but incorporate it into Confucius teaching. So, and actually using that to fight back, to ridicule Buddhism instead. So that in a way make Buddhism decline. Unfortunately, during that period, very few Buddhist monk scholars who were able to refute them. Then that was during the Song Dynasty when Buddhism faced a stiff competition from the Confucianists. Then came the Yuan Dynasty. Yuan Dynasty from 1271 to 1368, almost 100 years ruling China. This is a foreign force that was ruling China. The Mongolians were actually not part of China. They were in the northern part of China. Genghis Khan and later his son Kublai Khan conquered China and ruled China. The Mongolians were a nomadic race. They were in the northern part, and probably because of the scarcity of food, they were hunters, nomads. So they had to keep on expanding their territories to find new ways. So they kept pushing downwards, southwards into China. And eventually they won and they ruled China from 1271 to 1368 Mongolia. But it's very interesting if you look at the history of China. The conquerors would eventually become part of China and then eventually accepted as Chinese. So today Mongolia, although you still have a little Mongolia called Outer Mongolia outside China, is a country. There's a population, I think, is just about half a million. Then you have another piece of province called Inner Mongolia. Inner Mongolia is part of China. But the population of Mongolians in Inner Mongolia is more than the population of the Outer Mongolia. So the conquerors eventually absorb themselves into that country. If we even trace back further, Chinese early history, some of the kingdoms, the rulers were actually not the Han Chinese. But after conquering the Chinese, they become Chinese people, amalgamate into one. So we say war was a process of making the Chinese identity. So anyway, Yuan dynasty came, the Mongolians came, established the Yuan dynasty in China. Now, when the Mongolians conquered China, they not only conquered China, they also conquered northern, the whole of, probably the whole of Middle Asia, and also Tibet. And Tibetan Buddhism or Lamaism was actually brought into China. So the Mongolian rulers allowed a position of priority of Lamaism in China. Lamaism, strictly speaking, today we say Tibetan Buddhism or Vajrayana Buddhism, but sometimes people use the word Lamaism because Lamaism refers to the lamas. Lamaism, to differentiate it from Tibetan Buddhism, in the sense that Lamaism may not be exactly Buddhism, Just like we say Chinese religion, Chinese Lamaism was because the Mongolians ruled a vast continent, so they came across Lamaism. They adopted Lamaism as a religion of priority, and you could see lamas appearing in the court, to perform ceremonies and this and that, and even the corrupt form of tantra was widespread. Tantraism was already in India even during the time of the Buddha. Tantras were used. But when Tantraism took different forms, scholars say there is a form of Tantraism, we call it the debased form of Tantrism, or the corrupt form of Tantraism. That also spread into China, and then became quite popular also. But nonetheless, during this period, the Chan and the Pure Land managed to continue to survive. In fact, managed to continue to survive even until today. Now, we also notice that during the Ming Dynasty, there is a greater synthesis between Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. This is the period when actually monks, Taoist priests, and Confucius scholars tend to mingle more, and they learn from each other, and that is where people say Zen Buddhism absorbed some of the Taoist elements of nature, about Tao, into Buddhism. Taoists actually also started compiling their own suttas following the Buddhist method, and that's how they enrich themselves. And in fact, the three schools, while competing with each other, they also try to cooperate in certain sense. So if you are a Taoist monk, if you are a Taoist monk while traveling, you could ask for lodging in a Buddhist temple, for example. And if you are a Buddhist monk and you travel somewhere and you see a Taoist, we call it Tao Guan. In China, we differentiate between Taoist temple and Buddhist temple. So for Taoist temple, we don't call it Tao Si, we call it Tao Guan. So if you are a Buddhist monk, you could ask for lodging in a Taoist temple. So in a way, it is a gentleman sort of competition. You can say they compete, but at the same time, they also cooperate. But we could see more and more synthesis. After the Yuan dynasty, after the Yuan dynasty is the Song Yuan Ming Qing. After the Song dynasty, Yuan dynasty is the Ming dynasty. After the Ming dynasty is the Qing dynasty. Qing dynasty started in around 1638 and ended almost 300 years later, 1911. Okay. Now Qing dynasty, this time not Mongolians, they are Manchus. Manchu is another race. Okay, another nomadic race, mostly in the northeastern part of China. And Manchus and Mongolians, they are more or less like cousins, you know. They are friendly to each other, but not so friendly to the Chinese. It seems that when the last Qing Empress Dowager, when she decided to step down, she actually informed her Tibetan partners and also the Mongolian partners. So Tibetans, the Mongolians, and the Manchus, they were more closely related to each other than to the Chinese. Anyway, the Qing, who were also hunters, and the Manchus, who were also hunters in northeastern part of China, invaded China. And by 1638, they established the Qing dynasty in China. So this again is another race that had conquered China, and after conquering China, later part become part of China. Today, after 1911, most of the territories that were originally Manchus in the northern China, northeastern China, Heilongjiang, the area, now it's part of China. And most of the Manchu race people today adopted Han's name. So their identities are mostly lost. So they also, when they also adopted the Gelugpa school. The Gelugpa school refers to another Tibetan school or Vajrayana school. Now, this adoption of Gelugpa school means that the traditional 8 sects in China would further decline because they didn't receive patronage from the government or from the kingdom. Okay. Another problem during the Qing period is the Taiping rebellions. There was a rebellion led by Hong Xiuqian, who rebelled against the Qing dynasty. And during this period, they butchered. We will talk more about this Taiping rebellion later, but during this period, many monks, thousands of monks were killed, especially at the Yangtze River area downwards to the southern side, where the Taiping rebellions had power. They were actually Christian, or rather a deviant Christian sect that led the revolution, and therefore they were antagonistic towards the Buddhists, and they destroyed temples and monks and things like that. So that became another cause of decline, especially during the Qing dynasty. Now, I wrote here Anagarika Dhammapala visited Shanghai in 1893 because later on when we talk about Buddhist revival in Sri Lanka, I will be talking a little bit about Anagarika Dhammapala, also to indicate that there was some form of global connections that began to take place in the end of the 1800s between China, Sri Lanka, and India. So, okay, that was how Buddhism declined. So now we come to the ending part of this talk about the history of Buddhism in China. I think I will go briefly revise it again. The summary of the brief history. The first period, that of the entry and translation, supposedly during the 1st century AD, when Emperor Mingti officially invited Matanga and Dhammaraksa to his capital to do translation. Okay, that was the first period. And then the second period, that of interpretation, which lasted until the Tang Dynasty. This was the period when there were a lot of interchange between China and India. And then the third period, the establishment of the third period, and the establishment period that ended in 960 AD, where many sects took place, emerged in China and took roots, especially the Pure Land sect and the Zen sect took place. And then the fourth period, from the Ming Dynasty onwards, due to the competition from the Confucianists, and later the shift of support to Tibetan Buddhism, and Buddhism began to decline, and many other reasons which we will discuss later. But that was how this fourth period gives us an idea of how Buddhism, the journey of Buddhism in China. Okay. So now, having heard all these stories, we must not just listen to stories. We try to get some ideas of what lessons can we learn from this story. Okay, what are the important lessons or observations that we can learn from this story? Perhaps now we can open up for a discussion. What do you think? What have you learned from these stories that I have told you just now? Anybody would like to say something? Some of the lessons, some of the important points already mentioned when I was talking just now. Anyone would like to venture some answer?
It appears Buddhism's been around a lot longer than the Chinese history lets on. I mean, the official history.
A lot longer than the Chinese history.
Well, apparently the official history says it came about in just shortly after the 1st century.
Yes, but it could be much easier, right? It could be much earlier.
Much earlier.
Yeah, it could be much earlier, and I think we have good reasons to suspect that it could be much earlier. The point is, in the early days, usually only the official one are recognized. So when the king did the invitation, he would like to be the first person. He would like to be recognized, to be recorded as the person who did those things. But prior to that, if the events were undertaken by normal people, then it would not be recognized. But we do believe that actually Buddhism actually took place. Buddhism actually came earlier than that. Okay, anyway, this one we have to leave it to the academicians to further debate and talk about this. Okay, now first, there are a few important lessons that we observe in this part of the history. Buddhism was invited. See, it came earlier to Central Asia. Later, Emperor Mingti invited Buddhism into China. So this is unlike the spread of many other religions, which was a result of wars. You conquer one place, and after that, your religions follow. Whereas Buddhism is very much different. That is why generally it's acknowledged that Buddhism is a very peaceful religion, because its history was different from the history of many other religions. And because of that, Buddhism managed to survive in Asia. It was rather peacefully. Okay? Imagine if Buddhism were to come into China by an invading force, then probably today Buddhism would be still fighting a war with the Confucianists and the Taoists. But it was invited. Okay. Anything else you all can share with me? I think I want to share with you one very important point. You look at the history of Buddhism in China, it was a trend from nothing. It came in, it crept all the way up until the end of the Tang Dynasty, and then it come down again. So this actually follows the rule of the law of anicca, right?
Yeah, impermanent.
Nothing to feel sad about. I think it's a natural law. Nothing would continue to be the same all the time. So if you are up at the uppermost point, you have to prepare yourself to go down. Okay. So, but does it mean that when you are down, there's no possibility to go up again? Does it mean that?
Yeah, because it's going up and down, up and down.
Yeah, that's why we understand anicca.
Uh-oh, the signal has a problem.
So we are not no tangible result.
Can I hear you?
But you know, if you follow the law of anicca actually it was a very good law for us to guide us in our life. What is bad will not be forever bad. By the law of anicca, it can also become good later. Okay? So this is another important lesson we can learn. Another important thing that we learn from here is the synthesis or the pluralistic belief of the Chinese. Buddhism came into China. It did not push away Confucianism or Taoism, but instead it amalgamates itself, synthesizes itself with all the other belief systems in China. Now we must understand one thing. The three religions of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, actually they can be easily identified as different sets of teachings and institutions. So for example, Taoists got Taoist temple, Confucianists got Confucianist temple, Buddhists got Buddhist temple. So, and then Buddhist monks doesn't look like Taoist monk. Taoist monk doesn't look like Buddhist Confucius scholars. So, in terms of their identity, they are quite clear. We can actually know this is Buddhist, this is Taoist, this is Confucianist. But to an average Chinese, it's difficult to find the differentiation. What I mean is, to an average Chinese or a typical Chinese would enter into a Mahayana temple, okay, make some offering to the Buddha or to the Bodhisattva. He comes out, the next moment he enters into a Taoist temple. And when his children need to go to school, he would send them to the Taoist temple to pray. So he is actually making good use of these three religions. So to a typical average Chinese, he himself is a synthesis of the three religions. Okay? But the three religions, in terms of their own identities, in terms of their own institutions, in terms of their own teachings, they are all identifiable. All identifiable. But the normal Chinese, very difficult to be identified. So if you ask a normal Chinese, what religion do you believe? He would normally pause for a while and wonder, what do I actually believe? Okay, he would be wondering what he actually believed. But when he died, because there's no Confucianist priest to perform rites and rituals for funerals, so he would usually end up asking a Taoist monk or a Buddhist monk. So we say he would normally die as a Buddhist or a Taoist. Okay. So this important part about synthesis that we need to understand about the Chinese. From the past, the story also, we know that there is a great cultural exchange between India and China during that time. We all know in the early past, Indian monks came to China. You have Dhammaraksa, you have Matanga, you have Zhenti. Then this Indian monk, and then you have Bodhidharma, came all the way from India to China. So these are the names mentioned, but I suspect they were more. You know why I suspect more? Because usually those people who had great contributions, their names will be mentioned. But there may be many other people who came, not much contributions, especially when there were no writings left behind. So I always say Xian Zhang, because he wrote books, he wrote something, so people remember him. But according to one scholar Liang Qizhao, the number of Chinese monks who studied in Nalanda together with Xian Zhang about that time were recorded as 60 people. 60 people with names and many others without names. And I Ching, when he wrote in his article also, he mentioned something like about 40 names of monks who traveled like him, not in the same journey, but different journey to India. So there were actually many monks traveling across the land and sea between these two vast continents. Now this is referring to China and India, but actually Japan, Korea, Vietnam, all those countries around the Asia, they also came to India. So in the early days, you have the Indian monks going to India. Later part, you have Chinese monks coming all the way from China, either by sea or by land, to India and Sri Lanka. So there was a great cultural exchange. And because of this cultural exchange, actually today Buddhist contribution is a great contribution to the Chinese culture. So this is a different topic, because if you want to deal with the contribution of Buddhism to Chinese culture, it's a big topic. But generally speaking, briefly speaking, in terms of literature, today's Chinese literature is sprinkled with a lot of Buddhist terminology. For example, we say Isana. Is something that is terminology we borrow from China, from India. Then we talk about, let's say, 心猿意马. Our mind is like a horse or monkey. It's also borrowed from Buddhism. We say 一丝不挂, also from India. So there were many Chinese words. In fact, we say 胡说八道, also from also has relationship with Buddhism. The 八道 means the Buddhist 八道. Okay, you know, 胡说八道 means to speak about the Eightfold Path by the Hu people. The Hu people actually refer to the barbarians or the nomads in Western China. It means like what today we say, you are talking Christ. Huh? So it's a derogatory remark. Okay? So in many ways, especially literature, and then in terms of architecture, building architecture, in terms of painting, you know, when Chinese painters, when they painted all these natural sceneries, they would usually add a small pagoda in the mountain. In the deep mountain, if there's one pagoda jutting up, everything looks so beautiful. So in many ways, Buddhists contributed a lot to Chinese culture. Now this is unlike Islam and Christianity. While some people in China practiced or adopted or accepted Buddhist, Islam, or embraced Islam and Christianity, but they did not become part of the Chinese culture. So this is briefly what I wanted to share with you. In summary, the 4 periods, okay, and the important lessons. These are some of the important lessons. I will give some of these important lessons. I come up myself. You can come up with some more. When you read this one, what inspirations or what lessons have you gained? You can always write something more. Okay. So up to this stage, do you have any questions? Maybe some brief discussion before we break it up, before we take a rest. Anyone would like to ask something?
Can you explain a little bit? I don't know how to pronounce this name, the TAIPING rebels.
Oh, Taiping rebels. Okay, the Taiping rebels. Never mind. We will discuss it in the next lecture, chapter 4, where
Okay.
I will elaborate, and then you will get a better picture. Okay.
Thank you.
I just briefly just explain in brief. Okay. Okay. Next, anything else? If not, we take a rest. Then we come back. When you come back, if you have question, we can start with the question first before we proceed. Okay.
Okay.
So while resting, you can think of some questions. Okay.
Okay.
Please
thank you.
please help me. You need to ask some question, then I can rest my throat. Otherwise, I have to brag and brag.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Sure.
Sure. I'm not so sure whether some of them have come back because all of them are muted and no video. I'm not so sure everybody is back.
Yeah,
Maybe
I
you
mean,
can switch on and
there's only a
just
couple.
switch on your video, and then at least I know you are back. Okay. Okay, just now we were talking about the history of Buddhism in China, where it gone through the 4 periods of entry, then the growth, and then eventual decline. And then now we are hoping that it will grow back again. Now, do you have any questions so far before we proceed? Do you have anyone with anything you want to face? No?
I think
Okay, then say again.
so. I had one question. I think you talked about there were 18 Indian Sramanas that went to China in 217 BC, but were imprisoned. But I can't find much about that online. I was kind of curious to read about that more.
Well, some people say so. So, like I said, it is not a formal history, but some people did say so. So, some of these rumors may be true. We can't say exactly not true, because it is mentioned by some scholars that Xing Huangdi actually imprisoned them, and eventually they escaped through some miraculous means. And that is a way to say that Buddhism was actually very powerful. You can't imprison the monks. They would be able to have some kind of magical power and escape. And that was how the story was told. Okay, anything else? And in fact, Xing Huangdi, I'm not surprised, and I think they went at the wrong time, because Xing Huangdi was against all scholars and teachings, and in fact, he burned all books. What the greatest thing that he did was to burn all the books in China. Anything else? Okay.
I have
Okay, now we talk about the decline of Buddhism. Just now we the three main periods. Yuan, Ming, Qing, Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing, the three periods, from the Mongolian period, the Ming period, until the Manchu period. Okay. Now, the movement, the so-called revival movement, the Humanistic Buddhism revival movement took place during the Qing dynasty. So we would like to know exactly what happened during the Qing dynasty. So the Qing dynasty, mainly to identify what were the problems with Buddhism during that time. So there are a few factors that I have identified to find out why Buddhism suffered a big blow during the Qing dynasty. Why Buddhism declined during the Qing dynasty. Now, the first thing that I identified was the policy or the policies on religions adopted by the Manchus of the Qing dynasty. You see, the early Manchus, when they enter into China, they follow the policy of the Ming dynasty, of the previous dynasties, where there is actually a systematic management, qualification, vetting, and registration. If you want to become a monk, you have to sit for examination. You have to prove yourself that you are qualified. Then, thereafter, you have to get your registration. Okay? So this, in a way, ensures some qualities, okay, of the monks. But this was not the case later, during the Qianlong period, 1735, 1796. By the way, when I prepared this, actually there's no Chinese writing here. Later I incorporated all the Chinese writing. Sometimes I forgot to incorporate. because the Chinese names, if you don't have the Chinese characters, there are many ways to write, and then it can be very confusing. So that's why I try to put in the Chinese character. But this one I forgot. Okay, Qianlong, Emperor Qianlong, during his time, he had registration or nation years 1774. Your business now, you do your business, you run your business the way you think fit. Okay, this means say the last official connection of the court is cut off and disintegrated. So in those days, if you want to become a monk, you sit for examination. After that, you get this from the the document to tell you that so and so has become a monk or something like that. Okay. Then, after Qianlong died, China during the Manchu period, there were quite a lot of rebellions going on. So, because of the rebellion, he began to crack down on association in the name of religions. People always use religion to champion their political objective. So it is not surprise that during the time, organization actually have a hidden objective, is to overthrow the government of the Manchus. So because of that, the Jiaqing period, they cracked down on association. All those associations in the name of religions were cracked down. And because of that, Buddhism also suffered. And in order to crack down, enforced, women not allowed to go to temple. Number two, forbid private ordinations. That means you cannot simply ordain another person to become a monk as and when you like. Okay? It has to be by a body. Okay? Then number three, forbid chanting and pindachara in town. Pindachara, you go begging for food, or in this case, not only food, but to what you call, ask for donation. Ask for donation. So you can't go to the town to do chanting and ask for donation. A lot of monks in that period, or they will go down to the town when people die to do chanting. They get some money. But during the Jiaqing period, this was forbidden. And then the fourth one, actually preaching karma to collect wealth, means to say, you go to the town, you tell people,
Your audio is cutting out.
Frozen 2.
No, that movie was terrible.
Oh, was it really? I haven't watched
I'm
it.
totally joking. I just
Oh.
I
It's
just
like,
had a
granddaughter
reaction.
loved it.
I have no idea. It's not on ice, so I couldn't tell you.
He's on mute.
Good one. Good one.
The teacher's on mute.
No, it's because he's lagging out. He didn't mute himself, and I didn't mute him.
What are you doing?
And so his screen became unshared because of lagging internet.
Does he know? We can't hear him.
It shows an error on his screen.
Oh.
It's past my bedtime.
Not even
Mine
10
too.
o'clock.
Back online, and I think his mic is muted.
Yeah, I can't unmute him. All I can do is ask to unmute. But he can hear us.
Can you hear us, Professor? I don't think he can.
I
Okay.
get the feeling
Can you
that
hear me now?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Can you hear me now?
Just did it. Yes.
yes. Is it okay if we turn off our webcams? Yes.
Okay, shall I continue?
Yeah, everybody turn off your webcams and let's see if we can make it through the last 30 minutes.
Yeah.
The connection is bad.
Okay. Okay, now I continue, okay?
Yeah,
Are you
go
all
ahead.
listening?
Sounds good.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so now if you look at the rules that were enacted at that time, actually some of the problems were created by Buddhism itself. Because, like, for example, forbid women going to temples, that was because it became very not so safe for some women to go to temple. So the government, in order to protect the woman, so forbid women to go to temple. But this unfortunately means you sever the connections between the ladies and the monks. So in a way that it was for the good of Buddhism that we follow Vinaya rules. Women should not go to the temples alone. I think we are referring to temples run by monks. Then referring to the Vinaya rule, women should not go to the temple, probably because of some scandals. So the government had forbidden women from going to temples. But this might not have much effect, but the other effect are in town. This would make it very difficult for the temples to survive. Okay. So this policy make life quite difficult for Buddhism. Then, apart from the policies, government policies, the second issue we would like to face is during the Manchu period, you have the decline of Buddhist scholarship and studies. Prior to the Tang Dynasty, learning in places meant for translation of suttas or for masters. So if you want to learn something about Buddhism, you go to a xie zhao, or what you call a sutta translation place, or you go to a sutra preaching hall or jiangjing tang where you could listen to the masters. That was a practice during the Tang Dynasty when Buddhism was the most prosperous. But by the time of the Qing Dynasty, the Sangha members were not well educated. There were no new ideas, and Buddhism further declined in China. Are you all with me? I can't see my own video. I can't see any video.
We're
We are
here.
with
We're
you.
here.
We turned off our webcams because your internet
Oh, really?
bandwidth is low. So we are trying
I know, but
compensate.
I can't even see my own video.
Yeah, it's pretty
I can't
laggy.
even see my own video. Do you see my slides?
No.
We just
okay,
see
it's
you.
okay. I'll continue. Okay.
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 Because
We don't see
suddenly,
your slides.
I'm like talking to my own computer. I don't. Okay.
Mewenti.
Okay. So by the time of the Qing Dynasty, a lot of Sangha members were not well educated and they have no new ideas. And at that time, we also lack Buddhist intellectuals, like what happened during the Tang and the Ming dynasty. There were a lot of Buddhist intellectuals interacting with the Confucianist intellectuals. So hardly any outstanding scholar monks appeared during the Qing dynasty. Even if they were a few, they were not able to represent Buddhism to create any impact on the society. Okay, and then we have another issue. There was one emperor by the name of Yongzheng. Yongzheng. He also studied Buddhism, and after studying Buddhism, he actually tried to become a Buddhist scholar. So he directly involved himself in debates within Buddhism. Well, how can you debate with a king, you see? So many monks choose to silence themselves, not to debate with the king. You dare not play golf with the king. So if you play golf with the king, you better make sure that the king would win the golf tournament. So if you were to debate with the king, it is actually as good as the king trying to silence you. So Buddhist scholarship further dwindled during that period of time. So this led to a lack of mechanism within Buddhism to reproduce intellectuals and lost the support of intellectuals outside Buddhism. In the past, relationship of Buddhism with elites and intellectuals was intimate. Buddhist monks of Tang and Ming generally have close relationship with scholars and officials. Okay, I have covered two main reasons, policies and also scholarship. Now we have to look at one more issue, the organizational debate. In terms of organization, property is supposed to be owned publicly and to be used by the public and belongs to everybody. But later part, most of the monastery becomes what we call inheritance monasteries. It becomes inheritance monasteries. Some scholars say that is partly because of the among the Chinese that you don't like to pass whatever you have outside your families. So you tend to pass it within your families. And therefore, the monasteries later part becomes like inheritance. One monk would pass to the next monk his own adoption. He adopted that particular monk to be his own student. Then he will pass it to the next student and so on. So that becomes inheritance monastery. So the concept of monastery as public properties dwindled. And because of that, there were a lot of undesirable happenings within the Buddhist temples, within the community. Here is an old Japanese monk who came to China at the end of the 1800s, around 1876, when he established the first Japanese temple in Shanghai, Kocho Ogurusu. Okay, Kocho Ogurusu is a scholar monk of the Higashi Honganji temple. Higashi Honganji is the Jodo Shinshu. Jodo means pure land. Okay, pure land. 净土正宗 Jodo Shinshu. So if you go to Japan today, Tokyo, you still can see the Higashi Honganji. Honganji means Hongyan-si. Higashi means west, the west Honganji. He came to Shanghai, and he later wrote a tour of Beijing, Beijing Yuji. and in which he described how Buddhism had decayed in the Buddhist in China. Well, what he decayed, what did he mention inside this the tour of Beijing? He said he visited a monk in a temple, and the monk entertained him with tea and with meals, and after that, the monk showed him his bedroom, and he was surprised that the monk's bedroom has got 2 pillows on a big bed. I mean, he was trying to indicate that the monk actually had a wife. And then the monk laid down on the bed and offered him opium. So that monk was an opium smoker. So he was very disappointed. How could monk had a wife and smoking opium away in the temple? So this tour of Beijing or Beijing Yuqi, in which he described how bad the situation was in China at that time. And this organizational decay was further mentioned by some of the people like Zhang Taiyan and Xu Manshu, who pointed out that the cause for the corruption of Chinese Buddhists lay not in outer reasons. See, they try to say that it's not because of government policy or whatever, but in Buddhists themselves. Although there can be found many rules and regulations for monks to observe in the temples, the monks are actually lax in discipline. Many monks are not engaged in meditation in accordance with the regulations, but are enjoying a cozy and banal life. They do not preach scriptures, but devote themselves to ceremonies for the dead. When they are entrusted with the cause of the Dhamma, they are fully interested in money. So that was the description. That was the situation of Buddhism at that time. So here it rightly mentioned how Buddhism actually declined in China during that time. The main reason is within the Buddhists themselves. Since we are on this topic, now I suddenly remember something that I should have told you when I talked about the Xuan Zhang story, because that also shows the reason why Buddhism declined in India. Although we know Indian Buddhism eventually got its final blow with the invasion of the Muslim Mongols from the north. But actually, Buddhism in India also had its own internal decline factors. So Xuan Zhuang, when he traveled during the 7th century AD in India, he did mention that he observed some of the temples were rich with grain and rice, plenty of. It's very unseemly for temples to be like that. So you can imagine, during the time when Xuan Zhuang visited India, there were some temples who were like that. And if you trace back further, why temples were like that? You can attribute that partly to King Asoka. All of us know King Asoka helped to propagate Buddhism. But when you help, you should not help too much. He helped too much. What do we mean by he helped too much? He decreed that if that's at that time in terms of money and grains and crops, partly should be paid to the temple. So temples became so rich that many people, poor people especially, would like to send their children to become monks so that they would have an opportunity to learn something, because temples were also learning center. They become they would learn something there, and they will be well fed. They don't have to worry about food. So because King Asoka supported the temples, over support the temples, so finally the temples became too rich and attracted people who should not be there in the first place. So that led to the decline of Buddhism in India at a later stage. And then eventually when the Muslim invaders came, they burned all the temples, killed all the monks, and Buddhism was completely wiped out in India. Now go back to here in the Qing dynasty. This was the situation. Then another one. The monks have conflicts among themselves over properties. They indulge in the offering from the believers. What they offer as their service just leads to the decline of Buddhism. In fact, they are generally looked down upon. Some fall upon rich and powerful persons. They claim that they have to rely on the good emperors in order to protect them. Actually, they are bent on their own interests. They deserve to suffer government policy of confiscating their properties for education. This is a continuation from the remarks by Zhang Taiyan, okay? Famous scholar Zhang Taiyan. Okay? Then now we look at another comment at that time by Yang Wenhui. This person I would make an introduction in the next chapter, because this is a very famous personality in the revival of Buddhism in China. He made a comment on the same topic. He said, since the end of the scripture examination and with the slack implementation of the decree banning ordination, Buddhist monks have become ignorant, incompetent, and satisfied with the existing of affairs as they are. So here he attributed to the end of the examination and the banning of ordination. So he blamed this on the government policies for the decay. Here is more interesting. Now Tai Xu, this is the person that we take him as an icon of humanistic Buddhism in China. Many scholars attributed him to be the founder preacher of humanistic Buddhism in China. Now Tai Xu categorized monks into 4 categories, and because of this categorization, actually a lot of monks actually hated him for his remarks. So Tai Xu said, because of the organizational decay, there are 4 types of monks. The first one is called the noble type. The noble type, they escape into the forest. Self-cultivation had nothing to do with this world. Well, I think this remark is also relevant today. There are how many monks in this world today? It's estimated that there are actually about 1 million monks in this world today, But if you don't see so many monks doing their contribution to the world, then probably some of them are in the forest. Okay. So this is called the noble type. They spend their time deep in the jungle or in the forest or in the mountain or in big temples, nothing to do with work. The other one is called the incense type. They enjoy themselves in temples doing nothing. Because people come and offer incense, people make offerings, and temples are rich. So they just sit down and enjoy the incense. So Tai Xu called them the Zhuo Xiang Liu, or the incense type. Then Tai Xu said there is a third type called the sutra preaching type, Jiang Jing Liu. But he said these people are only talking about sutras which are irrelevant to the current issues. Later we will see that Tai Xu is always concerned about current issues, the issues faced by the Chinese people, the issue faced by China as a nation at that time. But he said we have quite a number of good preaching monks who preach the suttas, but irrelevant to the current issues. And of course, the fourth one, which he condemned very much, I call it the quasi-magic type. Quasi-magic type. Who are these quasi-magic type? They are the one who do a lot of chanting to get financial support. They learn how to sing and dance, how to beat the gong, how to play the instruments, and then they help people to carry out repentance, to chant sutras, and then to carry out rituals, all sorts of activities to sell Buddhism. They are like dancers, you know. So this was how he described it. And he mentioned, out of these four types, the first three only about 10%, another 90% quasi-magic type. And that is the problem, because the majority are involved in rituals to make money. Okay, this is the organizational decay part that Buddhism suffered during that time. Okay, now apart from the three factors mentioned above, there is another fourth factor. The three factors mentioned above: government policies, lack of scholarship, organizational decay. Now I'm sharing with you the fourth type, the Taiping Rebellion that took place around the year 1850 to 1864. 1850 to 1864. Okay. Because of the Taiping rebellions, the monasteries were burned to the ground, then their means of support taken away, and the monks were scattered. Thousands of monks were butchered in Nanjing. So just now someone asked about the Taiping rebellion. You know, China under the Manchu period was ruled by the Manchus. This area here was this area here, probably this part of Russia today, and this part of China, Beijing is somewhere here, this part of China here, they were the homeland of the Manchus. Okay? They invaded here, and finally they ruled China. And because of, when they were ruling China, there were a lot of rebellions here and there. And one of them took place in the southern part of China, led by a man by the name of Hong Xiuqian, same surname as me. Hong Xiuqian, who is this man, Hong Xiuqian? He actually, one day, came across the Bible, and he studied the Bible. And after that, again, you know, people know how to champion their political cause by using religion. So he claimed that he is the Son of God. He claimed that Jesus Christ is the eldest Son of God, and he is the brother of Jesus Christ, the younger Son of God. And with that, he wanted to build his own Christian kingdom by overthrowing the Manchus. So this is probably the first first religious war in China in the name of religion. He used that to fight against the Manchus, and the Manchus at that period was already losing its power. So they managed to establish the area here, which he claimed to be under his kingdom, called the Da Hong dynasty. So if you look at this area here, Nanjing, he established his capital somewhere here in Nanking, okay, near to Shanghai. And the here is Wuhan. Okay. Actually, it's not exactly that whole area. If you look at the map, some areas were still under the Manchus. And because of his hatred against anything traditional Chinese, when his army came, his army would wipe out the temple, the Confucianist temple, Buddhist temple, Taoist temple, and whatnot, and he came and wiped them out. So that Taiping rebellion actually was also a great blow to Buddhism, especially Buddhism in this part of China. Most of the properties were destroyed. Okay. Okay, that was the part of the reasons for the decline of Buddhism. Then the next, apart from the political rebellion, the next one is the Christian evangelization. This part I have already mentioned earlier, but I would repeat here, Christian evangelization. Again, I mentioned here, the Nestorian arrived in Xi'an during the Tang Dynasty, and there is a tablet here to indicate that China, Christianity actually entered into China around 635. Okay. The entry of Christian into China, to some extent, would create an impact to Buddhism during the Qing dynasty. In 885, at the height of the great anti-Buddhist persecution by Emperor Wuzhong, Tang Wuzhong, that Buddhism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism be banned and considerable assets forfeited. That was during the Tang dynasty. And then by 986, a monk reported that Christianity is almost extinct. Now, legally speaking, Christianity was forbidden in China until the Opium War. So now we back to the Qing dynasty. Just now was a little bit of background. We're back to the Qing dynasty, when Christian evangelization was allowed to carry on in the interior part of China. Because China kept losing wars to the Western powers, so in 1840 they lost a war and they allowed the Western powers to force their ways into China to carry out trades. Now, one of the reasons why China was not so open to the world at that time was because, in terms of trade, the Chinese claimed that they were self-sufficient. They actually need not have to trade with any country outside of China. Their own population is self-sustained. And e-trading would mean that to the advantage of the other countries. So they adopted the closed law policy. And another reason is they noticed that the Western people come with the religions, and that may upset the political stability of their countries. So they decided to have the closed law policies. So in 1840, you had the Nanking Treaty, and in 1844, USA, France, England had the authority to trade in 5 areas, including Macau, Hong Kong, and so on, and to establish churches for their devotees. Okay. And then by 1858, the Tianjin Treaty, where China signed with Russia, USA, England, and France, allowed Christian preachers to preach in the interior part of China. So in our human history, 1850 onward was a very turbulent period. Especially for China, this was a period when there were a lot of turbulence, and Christian preachers began to come into China. And then by 1860, the Peking Treaty allowed Catholics to claim back lands previously confiscated and so on. So now all this had some impact on the traditional Chinese beliefs. Because these Christian missionaries have the advantage of being backed by Western power, and they tend to do one thing. They flooded China using their special position diplomatic privileges, and military forces to ridicule and condemn Buddhism, even destroyed temples and Buddha images, and forcefully occupied temples and properties. For example, in 1844, the French Catholic induced Buddhists to donate 6 temples to the church. And then all this led to a loss of faith among Buddhists, since they saw temples without monks and Buddhism was not powerful even to protect themselves. So the advent of Christianity and Christian evangelizations during the Qing dynasty actually dealt a blow to the Buddhists, because many commoners found that, well, the Buddhist God is not as powerful as the Christian God. The Christian gods, backed by their powerful resources, were able to do so many things that they could not do. So while despising the West, the Chinese actually also had some kind of admiration for the West. Now, everything spoken, there's actually one big cause to the decline of Buddhism in China during the Qing dynasty. And that is the weakening of China as a whole. With China as a whole weakened. When China as a whole weakened, many scholars, many politicians came forward and tried to analyze the causes, and they came out with a lot of solutions. They blamed the economic and political downfall of China on traditional belief system. They say, why we are so poor now? Why we are so weak now? That is because we believe in Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. So some of them will propose the first one. We go for total westernization. There's one school that would like to advocated everything to go for anything of the West. And that is when China began to send some students overseas to learn also. Well, some would like to have a more modified approach. They call it Chinese learning as a substance, Western learning for applications. Meaning to say, we would still like to maintain our Chinese culture, meaning to say we would like to maintain our traditional religious belief, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, whatever folk beliefs and Tian concept and whatnot. But we will also learn from the West, their science and technologies, their knowledge for our own use. So what we want to learn from the West to be for our own use, and our traditional culture would be the core or the substance of it. Well, another school say, no. No matter how, all these Western things cannot be trusted. We want to maintain our Oriental culture. Oriental culture means culture of the West. Indian culture, Japanese culture, Chinese culture. If we can make use of all these Western Oriental cultures, we will become strong again. And this is the reason why at this time many Chinese went over to Japan to study. Japan, after Meiji Restoration, actually became more and more powerful and more advanced, became a stronger nation. Therefore, we can learn from the Japanese. Even Sun Yat-sen studied in Japan or went to Japan. So many of the early revolutionaries actually went to Japan, because Japan is just next door, neighbor. Then another one said, no, not Oriental, but Chinese culture. You advocated that we must go back to our Chinese culture, and our Chinese culture means Buddhism, Christianity, Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. So there were all this kind of debate, but on the whole, the weakening of China as a whole were blamed on Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. Then came another big blow during the Qing dynasty. That is temple properties for education. since there were many temples, like I said just now, there were actually many rich temples around, underutilized. So there was one scholar by the name of Zhang Zidong in his article Qin Xue Pian, where he mentioned or he proposed to run modern education by using temple properties. Temples now should not just be there, not used, but to be used for secular education, 70% secular education, and then maybe 30% you can still use it for your funding of the properties of the monasteries. Well, the end result was quite destructive and unexpected. Because of this, Confucianist teachers' livelihood were threatened, and also a lot of trouble to Buddhism and Taoism. In fact, Buddhist monks and Taoist monks, they all wanted to protect their properties. But this proposal threatened, and some of the temples were actually forcefully taken to be for this modern educational purposes. But of course, if you would, in retrospective, if you look at this, rather than to leave the temple there, not used, what harm is there for them to be used for modern education?
We're past time.
Yeah, I have passed the time, is it?
Yeah, it's 10 after 10 or 8 after 10. Sorry.
Okay, I have overshot the time. You want me to stop here now? Okay, I can stop here. Okay, I will continue later. So I will stop here at the third. When I will begin with temple properties for education again later part of the day. Okay. So we'll stop here.
Sounds good.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dato.
Thank you. See you.
Yeah, if you have any questions, get it ready so that we can start with the questions.